Howdy, howdy, everybody. Welcome back to Cause Before Symptom. I am your esteemed guest host, Urban. It is the 2nd of June, 2026. James is on vacation. He should be back tomorrow, but I'm filling in for him tonight. We're going to continue where we left off last night because we got through kind of half of it. We didn't get a chance to finish the second half, which is much lighter. And I felt like we could just go ahead and do some review of examples and more hands-on right in front of you and break it down. So we're going to do that and pick up on the topic of the syntax, Parse-Syntax, quantum grammar. And it actually gave me a chance to think about some better ways to explain some of the topics, because there were certain points where I realized to myself, hi there, I wanted to say hi to everybody. Let's see, we got Boots, hello Urban Warrior family, glad to see y'all here. Don't forget to hit the like button. Thank you much. Let me go ahead and put myself behind and do some reorganizing on the little stage here. Boots says, don't forget to hit the like button. Glad to have you, Boots. How's it going, R. Gertison? Hey, everybody. Glad to be here for more knowledge. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm glad to have you. And we have Dory Warner on Substack. Greetings from Texas. Love your work, Urban. Thank you. I appreciate you very much. I love to hear that people take something and learn something new. Really, that's the best compliment that I could hope for. So, yeah, gave me a chance, because last night when I was trying to articulate stuff, sometimes I got the impression that I understood it in a tangible way to myself, but in order to articulate it, it was not as strong as I wanted it to be. So the reason that this is a topic that I find interesting, especially to Cause Before Symptom, to James's audience, because James has done the Breath Wars series. He's done 5 books, and as a matter of fact, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and bring up the playlist so we can show that off, because he's actually just completed the audio books, so that, I mean, they're on Rumble. I did do the first book and upload it to Substack in audio form for anybody who would like to be able to listen to it and not necessarily have to play the video. And then I'm going to talk to James about getting the rest of those into audio format. But he's done 4 out of the 5 books. I think he's completed 4 out of the 5 books. So I've organized them into playlists, beginning with Breath War. And all the books are available for free. I want to also say that. They're not available in print format. That is the caveat. You can get them from James's website, jamescarner.com, and there's a link in the description for that. And you could download them as a PDF document. You can read them for free, all of them. And he's done narrations. They're on Rumble. That link should be in the description as well, and it'll be in the Substack post also. He's done the Ritual Machine. Breath War was in 4 parts. It actually took him like 6 hours to do in total. Ritual Machine, that one was only 2 parts. He got through that one shorter in about 4 hours. Crown of Blood, 1 and 2. And then The Stone That Speaks in 3 parts. And that's the most current one that he's completed. And then this playlist also has the content that he and I did, the 2-part interview series on Breath War. So it's really interesting. Back to my point, he talks about this idea of a contractual basis to breath contracts, or the basis for that being, you know, Cain and Abel. And so Cain kills Abel, and the blood the blood of Abel kind of goes into the, you know, the ground, and it says that the ground or the earth cries out with Abel's blood. And so James saw that as a type of a debt, and I'm inclined to agree with that. That is also what comes to mind. I mean, what does it mean when, you know, somebody's blood gets into, the dirt or something, and in the context of, the Bible and Genesis, it talks about the earth cries out, Abel's spirit, but it has the weight and the gravity of it being done in vain, am I my brother's keeper? It's a very defining story. It's a type of, binary, a light priesthood and a dark priesthood. And see, on YouTube, the Masters Mahon podcast, that the meaning of the word Master Mahon is it has to do with, it's a term out of LDS Mormon scripture, their extended scripture. Now, the reason that's actually important isn't for canonical reasons, because we all know, hopefully, that Joseph Smith was a Freemason. That's very interesting, because Joseph Smith actually was excommunicated from Freemasonry because he said that he was given the missing code word of the highest degrees. And basically, as I have read in a text that it talks about this, I can't remember the name of it, but it talks about how they kicked him out of Freemasonry because he said that he had this secret code word, the lost word of Freemasonry, that nobody else had, which means that he can go further than anybody else can. And so this has got a lot of, almost predominantly, a Masonic backstory. When you look at LDS, you can't even look at it unless you take into account that it grew out of Freemasonry. Joseph Smith's father was a Freemason. Master Mahon was a title claimed by Cain after killing Abel in the book of Moses in LDS extended scripture, the Pearl of Great Price. I'm actually looking for the graphic. Let me go ahead and pull that up, because that's why I made all of these graphics, because all of the work that I do, it's probably is, I haven't really articulated or explained this, but all of the work I do forms this database for myself. So what I do is I refer back often, and that's why I usually link all of the posts, old posts that I've done that are concerned with the subject matter at hand. So I refer back to my post all the time, and I made these images so that for something like this, I can present it. So Mahonism, it means, when you translate it, master of the secret combination, or master of the great secret. Maha means great, master of a great thing, the great secret. It was first claimed by Cain after making a covenant or pact, a contract with Satan to kill for personal gain. Now, in the LDS scriptures, this is actually just a Freemasonic oath. Basically, Cain swears to Satan that he's going to create this secret oath, and he's going to swear everybody to secrecy, and he's going to get something from Satan in return. And so this is why he ultimately kills Abel, to harvest this debt, as my research finds, from one direction, and as James's books and his research has found from synthesizing all of the occult text and finding out what is it that they're all talking about. They're all talking about generally some type of energy or technology. Technology is a better word. Magic is a technology. And so we found it from two different directions, and that's why I really think there is credibility to this. However, in the mainstream, this has become known as Loosh. I don't know where that word came from. I have no clue where that came from, but James has correctly identified it as breath, because the distinction between the spirit, the soul, and the body would be that you don't have a soul, you are a soul. And I've said this a few times, you are a soul. And it's only because you have this animation, the word that's used is animation, an animating wind or breath. And so this is the the magic breath of God. It's what makes you into a being. And I believe animals have this, and anything that's living has this, even plants and things beyond our comprehension. And has to do with complexity. But it's breath. I don't believe it's Loosh. And I think by calling it Loosh, that completely diverts from what it is. So Mahonism is a type of dark priesthood. The idea is that knowledge is used as the window. So we've presented Maxwell's demon, and there's this little window. The way that this demon works is he doesn't actually manipulate the environment. He just uses information. So information pops up as a result of this 1871 thought experiment, Maxwell's demon. And so the window of Mahonism is knowledge. And so when JFK said that secrecy was the enemy, that's what he meant. He was correct in identifying the enemy as secrecy, not any one group, because every group, this is mostly true, if you have a group which sequesters itself off from society, and the way that problems are dealt with is that you don't go outside the group, it's dealt with inside the group. Any doesn't matter what race you are, anywhere that is the dynamic where secrecy, it is right to remain silent, wherever that is law, you're going to have bad things happen. Because what's happening is that the spirit is it's not the Holy Spirit of love and faith and charity and a healthy amount of empathy, I would compare it to, not complete suicidal empathy, but boundaries are important to that. But empathy and love and lifting people up. The negative to that, the vacuum negative pole that doesn't exist on its own, it exists out of a fundamental lack. It's called privation. And so that is secrecy, which then breeds fear. That's why they do blackmail. That's why, for instance, you had the Kristi Noem, who is the Secretary of Homeland Security, but she didn't even know what habeas corpus was. She was in Congress testifying, and they asked, "What can you define habeas corpus?" And she only knew that Lincoln used it to take away rights, but she couldn't articulate an answer to what habeas corpus was. But good thing she's out. And if you remember, when they kicked her out, she had her husband's pictures leaked on the internet. It was because they had to leak her, the blackmail file. And so they do this to breed a fear. Same thing on a society. All these principles work on a society slowly. After 9/11, fear has been boiling. It's a slow boil since 9/11. That was the justification, was 9/11. That was why it was a ritual. Definitely, of course, there's no question about it. Especially when you go and you look at that old clip where, there's like a year after 9/11 and they have a bunch of people like marching in and like they're doing this big circle around the base of 9/11. It's pretty crazy. But yeah, so secrecy and fear are the negative pole. That's what animates people, though. When people are scared, they will do very irrational things. That's why people get hurt, people go missing. It's because of fear, and that's usually from a very cowardly sense of fear, because we don't want somebody to say something about what they saw. We're just going to have a right to end their life. But it's all because they're really animated by fear. And fear comes from this environment of secrecy. So an example I gave for Mahonism was the Catholic Church's gatekeeping of the Bible during the Middle Ages. Because only the priest could read the Latin Vulgate, results in a power dynamic between the clergy and the lay people. That's a very approachable example, but this comes in all different shapes and sizes. But the very important part that is unique, one could even say, what is it that these different creeds and people from all different parts of the world, what is it that they share in common? Well, they have the spirit of secrecy. They all share the same spiritual plane, and that is secrecy and fear. It's a very low vibration. So that's Mahanism. And so when it comes to LDS, very interesting. There is this idea. Let's see if I have. I'm not sure if I have this one. I might. Yeah, I do. That this may have been related to the Masonic secret word Mahon, which if you spell it in one variation, you can spell these things different types of ways. But one spelling, you just pull out the Beth and you get Mahon. And so doesn't matter if it is or it isn't. The truth is, Joseph Smith probably believed that it was. And what LDS is it is pretty much, he just went off and made his own sex cult of Freemasonry. But I do believe that a lot of the people who are important within the mystery cults, within the secret societies of today, I think they are hiding within those types of groups, not just LDS, but that weird set of groups that popped up within the last 150 years. And you look at their books and it's all Masonic phrases, and they have monuments that are pyramids, and they have Egyptian stuff. You know what I'm talking about. And they have the crown and the cross, church and state mixing. I think they are hiding within those groups because Freemasonry's cover was blown when you discover the existence of the anti-Masonic party in American history, because people started to ask questions back then, and I think their cover was blown. And according to William Schnebelen, who James interviewed, they were instructed, if you get into trouble, go hide in the Mormon church, in his case. But go hide there, you'll be fine there. And we know that, I interviewed J.R. Sweet. That was a really a great interview that I was glad to get the pleasure to do. J.R. Sweet was from LDS family, MK Ultra Monarch program. He was like a trained assassin, but he names Senator Robert Byrd, who Kathy O'Brien names. They have a lot of things that are very similar. He probably is one of the survivors who has been best able to articulate the experiences to me, at least the way that I am able to. I know what he means. I can understand what he's trying to describe. So yeah, dark stuff. I've heard nothing. Not nothing, but at least the niche that I am in researching, it's probably the darker side, the conspiracy side. But at the same time, here's the truth. Researching the dark stuff that goes on, I've actually had the pleasure of meeting very strong people who have very strong will, people who have found some sense of way to recover amidst that, because that how would you recover from that? So very strong people are forged in that process. That has been something that's been very miraculous to me to see, very inspiring for me to see. But that's where Mahanism comes from. That is my belief, in a bit of a tangent, but that sums up what is this Loosh harvesting. Well, it has to do with pretty much the same process as the Maxwell's demon. Manipulation of information. That is the goal of all intelligence agencies. That's why they're called intelligence agencies. You have generally, you could call them needs. You have probably about 9 different needs, but A book that I would recommend if you want to know more about that is I think it's called The Five Love Languages. The idea is that if another person fulfills your needs, and it's different for everybody, of course, but whoever fulfills your needs, you would generally interpret that as somebody showing you an act of love. You know, somebody repeatedly fulfills various needs, you would eventually see that as them showing you an act of kindness or love. And so this same idea is used by intelligence agencies, because records and monitoring and telemetry data and Palantir smart city technology and meta devices and wearable technology is used to create a digital twin, a surrogate model, which we've covered. That was a great episode. I suggest people, I really, I know that it's been a lot of information. I do understand that, but the last series of episodes really do come together, because I've referred back a number of times to topics that we've covered, but we did cover surrogate modeling and digital twins. So they will use the data that they collect to create a voodoo doll, a digital trained AI model that is meant to be trained on your data. And it's basically a voodoo doll. I mean, if people know what a voodoo doll is, you know, from like the movies, and they have like the little pins they stick in it. It's just that, but you know, it has a nice Palantir dashboard, and they have cool little name for it. They get up and they have a tech demo. It's the same thing. It's like the Machine from Person of Interest. That was a really great show, but you know, I watched a great deal of that show, and here I am today. It's really, I would honestly just go full conspiracy theory right now. They probably saw something, knew what was being developed, and they communicate this through the shows, of course, but it's exactly what it was. You know, the all-seeing eye is not just a symbol anymore. They're literally building an all-seeing eye. And that's why they're building a tower. See, they've inverted the quantum computer down to hell. Down to the metaverse. Down to the metaverse. Because they think that they are smart enough to fool God. So they're going to build straight down. And then they're going to have everybody invert the whole world. We're going to turn everything upside down. We're going to turn black into white. We're going to turn up into down. We're going to turn funny into unfunny. We're going to turn happiness into misery. Turn men into women. We're going to turn everything upside down. And so they really believe that they just build straight down to hell, and they just flip the whole world upside down, that they're going to have their tower. And I really don't think that's far-fetched when you go back and you see that their plan is basically, the ship is sinking. We need to build this thing that is smarter than us. We need to build something smarter than us to fix the problems that we are sinking from. The ship is sinking. We don't know how to fix it. Build the AI machine and let it do it. And so, is that really, how far removed are we? Insanity is insanity. So you don't have to believe it. Probably great if you don't believe it. But they believe it. They definitely believe it. And if you really go, they don't hide this as much as they used to. It's actually been very out in the open. Very out in the open. How's it going, Philip? Nice to see you. I hope everybody's doing well tonight. James should be back tomorrow. I'm filling in. We're going to get on with the slides that we didn't do last night. We're going to do those because we've only got a couple of those. They're not going to take us too long. Then we're going to just go ahead and look at some examples and some of the notes that I put in the post for yesterday's video. Anytime I do stuff, I encourage people to check out the Substack post, because I always put the link to the Substack post in the description. And I put most of the links to my old content. I put most of the notes. And it's like, if you would like to know more about this or where this came from, you can find that all in the Substack post. I can put as much as I can, but for instance, the descriptions on most of the platforms have a certain, you can only put so many characters in them. So, and also, you know, I can only post links as comments on my videos, but if I try to post a link on somebody else's comments on YouTube, it flags the comment. It's really weird, but I've learned these things just in making stuff over the last year or two. Boots says that he just started rewatching Person of Interest. It's a great time to start to rewatch it, because you're going to probably going to catch all these. You watch something once, that's great, but I tell you, if you watch something twice and you start to just catch these little details. You know, it's fascinating. There really is a value to rewatching something, and I talked about that with Michelle Gibson, and a lot of people were inspired by that, because I remember we had brought that up, and a lot of people had I got a lot of viewers from those interviews with Michelle, and I'm very grateful for that. But all the people who came over to my channel, that was very kind. I appreciate that. And Michelle Gibson is great. She's done content for like 8 years over on YouTube. She's got stuff about just Americana region. She'll tell you about when this monument was built, or when this lighthouse was built, and how they're all in linear alignment. She's you know, she's got great content. I couldn't recommend anybody more, especially because that topic is it's hard to find people who present it in a very digestible way. But it's definitely value to rewatching something. People were inspired by that. A lot of people had brought that up in the comments. So yeah, it's a great show. I might rewatch it soon too. Let's go ahead and bring this up, the slides. So we were talking about syntax, how syntax works. Actually, as a matter of fact, I did create another graphic that will show you surface structure versus deep structure. Obviously, the picture that best comes to mind is the iceberg. Let me know if you guys can see the words in the, like the arrows and the 3 words in the middle. If not, I can make it bigger. But the idea is the deep structure is that 80% of your brain power. Also, you could argue Bob Proctor, who I presented a clip from Bob Proctor, who makes a case that the subconscious mind plays with the conscious mind. Ian McGilchrist, the master and his emissary. The deep structure, that is the master. The surface structure is the emissary. He's the errand boy. I am going to give the order, and now you're going to go do it. So the emissary is the conscious mind. That is, you know, the part of us that we're aware of, because the left hemisphere is associated with language, and that is why syntax and language holds a lot of valuable information, and so do math and numbers. And there was a channel that I was watching. The name of the channel on YouTube is Pure Mathematics. I believe it's Pure Mathematics. And he's never seen him before until just a couple days ago, and I discovered him, and he's very interesting content. He's given me a number of recommendations. But he talks about how people who pursue pure mathematics, they don't necessarily do it for we're going to use it for something, there's like a monetary value behind it. It's because it reveals things that have to be true even if you don't like it. So it has a tendency to reveal uncomfortable truths, and there's a bit of a raw truth and beauty to it. But it's in that gymnastics that you do with your mind, like when you actually think about math. And let's just use, for an example, whatever you've heard me talk about in the course of the videos that you have seen me present, that type of exercise, the reason that it has popped up in cybernetics, the reason that it is popped up in this idea of feedback loops and behavior and psycho-cybernetics, there's a reason that it has popped up there as well. It's because it actually models how things really work. But then when you combine numbers and language, which is what David Wynn Miller did, I think it is very advanced. And I understand that it may be not something that most people can grasp. I understand that. And at the same time, I think that there is an element of genius to it. I really do. I really do. Because to take language, which, you know, we're going to talk about the past and the future, to get rid of the past and the future, to have a syntax that is always existing right now is really fascinating. But that comes with a big caveat, because that is precisely what you would need to complete the machine from person of interest. Because, you know, if it is always in the now time, it makes it a perfect way to code or program things. And it is basically programming for all intents and purposes. One could look at it as just programming with language itself. So let me get my pointer out here and put the image away. Language is not merely descriptive, it is a type of geometric architecture of consciousness. Hidden cybernetic loops, a feedback loop, a cycle of behavior. It is a feedback loop could be as simple as you take in information, you do something with it, you act back out, and then, you know, that causes some change. And then you observe that change and you do it again. That's a feedback loop. An isomorphism exists between neuro-linguistic programming's structure of magic. That was the name of the two texts, that the map and the territory. And that chart I just showed you, primarily what I base that off of. And really, the reason that I think there is a genuine science to what David Wynn Miller created was because it does like when you draw the analogies, it is isomorphic to quantum error correction. It just kind of flows naturally. It's like if I wanted to teach an audience about this, I would probably be able to draw a comparison to quantum error correction. As a matter of fact, I pulled that up, so let me just give you the visual. I'm a firm believer in visuals. I think visuals are what make the difference. So I did this like a post on, it's not an article, but it's like a little note on Substack. And I showed this visualization. And this is what is meant by the, let's see here, I'll just pull it up. So if you look down here in the bottom left where I've just highlighted, if you have the bottom right green corner, that represents in this system a stable noun, a fact, a claim, a contract, a valid, stable thing existing now. Now, David Wynn Miller, in the video that I had watched earlier today, he says, every one of these 5, 6, 7, because it's stable, you can correct the error, you can have it exist in the now time. To do that, you have to form, we're going to look at that in a second, you have to use the 5, 6, 7, which is, it says right here, these are chains, 5, 6, 7, for the bridge, okay, is a connector. It just connects these chains of 3. For the bridge is over the river. You see how they kind of go hand in hand. It's like your right and left hand fit together. For the bridge is over the river. So for the bridge, that's one block. For the bridge is one block. Is connects it over the river. So it's actually an active and a passive, because for the bridge is, and then when you pick up on the other side, you have to, sorry, I'm drawing a blank. Let me go back to my example. Right here. So, preposition article lodio. For the learning of magic is with the study of the English language. You start with a cause, which is interesting because we're on cause before symptom, and there's a reason it comes before the symptom, because the cause causes a consequence. So the way that you put these together is for something, for some shoot, sorry, I'm drawing a blank. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank right now. It seems like I always like have something that I'm thinking of and I don't have it in front of me. Yes, I have it right here. First, for establishes the cause, of establishes the consequence and effect, is activates the verb thinking, with establishes the possessive claim over the action, and of establishes the authority for the action. The reason for that is because every single one of these chains represents a stable chain of logic that answers all of the 5 basic questions: the who, what, where, when, and why. That's the way that I'm trying to explain it. It stands on its own. It answers all of the questions. You don't have any ambiguity. You have made a full claim that gives all of the coherent context. That is the way that I would like to articulate that. So back to this example here. 5, 6, 7 is stable. That is a stable chain. So one chain of 5, 6, 7 for the learning. So let's get rid of this. For the learning. That is 1 cube. So then you might ask, what learning? Okay. Learning of the magic. So you've answered the question. Well, you're learning something, but what are you learning? Okay, but for the learning of the magic, what? Well, it is, you could use R is plural, is for the consequence of the action, is with the study of the English language. So you see, you've set yourself up here with 2 halves for the learning of the magic. What that does, that's an active, that's a passive. When you have an active and a passive, those come together to move forward in terms of motion. That's why we have is. Is a thinking verb. Really, the argument behind all of this is that the only real verb is thinking. Because, for instance, if you're running, you can't be running if you didn't think to do it in the first place. So you have to make a conscious effort, some type of thought. You can't really articulate what you have to think to run. You just do it. But to do it, you have to, whatever the verb is, whatever that thing is, that's the is and are verb. That's why it's connective. It has motion to it. So for the learning of the magic, okay, what about it? Well, it's with you whenever you have the studying of the English, you get the learning of the magic. And that's why you can read it forwards and backwards. 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, 2, connecting, 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7. But then you have to read it on the bottom and it goes backwards. Ignore this. This is actually a developer bug. Should have fixed it, but it's actually perfectly good. But you read it backwards. 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, 2, 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7. And that's because you could reverse it. So putting it forwards, for the learning of the magic, is with the studying of the English language. Or for the studying of the English language is with the learning of the magic. The sentence means the same thing forwards and backwards. It's because you have established exactly, well, you've established a preposition, a article, and then a noun, a stable noun. That's why we have compared a qubit to the final noun. So if I'm not sure, it kind of cuts it off. That's better. 7. Hopefully you can see that pop up. I think you can. It says 7, fact, noun, stable, mathematical placement. Sorry for the cutoff. Sucks. 5 is a preposition. It is you're saying, establishing a domain over something. And so what I did was, I have some examples, but we're going to go after we do our other slides. So we got off subject there, but I wanted to give people a bit of an example of how syntax works. Let's go back to the other slides. Here we go. Yeah, so we got off subject when I started talking about how this was analogous to quantum error correction. The idea is that you have to have a way to rectify error. It's like when you're looking at DNA strands. They're palindromic. It's because when you go down one strand, it goes back up the other side, and that's where that helix formation goes or comes from. And so it's using that same idea. So for the cause of the consequence is, so you've kind of started something with the result of the action, with the result by the authority, or you could say the result of the action or by the authority, but you have to say that there is a person that is kind of behind it. What you would be doing there in terms of, James calls it the, like the signet ring of authority. That is our authority that comes with breath. So, okay, we looked at the surface structure. We looked at that already because I did a diagram, but I'll read it. The surface structure, the tip of the iceberg, that's the spoken written word. Deliberately hides the full linguistic representation, representation, prone to generalization, deletion, and distortion. That was those three arrows in the middle. Deletion, generalization, distortion. So the reason that that happens is because, you know, the 80% unconscious part of your mind brings in so much data through the five senses, it has to give you only the most important part of the data. You can't give you the whole picture because your conscious mind, the emissary, it's like trying to send the errand boy out to run the whole kingdom effectively. The deep structure, the hidden architecture of reality. This is some of the things you don't see because your body takes care of this for you. It's like, how do I articulate? What do you think to run? You just do it. It's because those mechanics have been delegated to a part of the mind where you don't have to think consciously about them as much. You just do it. So that would be the deep structure. But in terms of thought, when we apply this to psychology, this has to do with psychological pain and systemic snafus, which is what they call it in the structure of magic, arise from these impoverished linguistic representations. Again, we would call this probably bias. It's biased within our own mind. It's like, for instance, if you ask one person about a topic, you can't take that as like the entirety of the topic because they're only one person. But if you ask 100 of the best people on a topic, that would be a better representation of the topic. So in terms of fiction or deleted information, this is a good graphic. If somebody was to say, I'm scared, your immediate response, even in your mind, this doesn't necessarily have to be linguistic, even when you could think it in terms of language. But you would say of what? What are you scared of? You're trying to get a picture, you're trying to clear out the noise, you're trying to do error correction. And so that's what I mean in terms of error correction. Trying to clarify, trying to stabilize, trying to ascertain details in now time. You don't want to know if somebody's scared. I mean, probably you want to know what they're talking about right now. Like, are we in danger, or were you scared of something 10 years ago? So the impoverished surface structure, I'm scared. The meta model, the meta means beyond. If whatever they tell us, they base it off of a translation of the word meta, meaning beyond. So meta model, beyond model, or query. This is forcing deep structure retrieval. What are you scared of? This is why there's almost a emotion to this process. It's hard to articulate the motion. It's hard to articulate that. As much as I try to articulate it, it's something you have to see almost in a it's like it has to be maybe you know how they say there's first, second, third person. It's almost like seeing things in the zeroth, the zero person view, I guess, is a way you could look at that. Okay, let's move on. So cybernetics, these feedback loops, and the Ouroboros symbol, they invented that symbol a long time ago, and it's because they knew about feedback loops. That's arguably the proof that they knew about feedback loops. So cybernetics has to do with steersmanship. The word cybernetics comes from a Greek word kubernetes, which means steersmanship. but it has kind of this connotation of the art of steermanship. It's you have error, you have to correct your error. So multi-agent control. Communication is fundamentally a mechanism of control designed to coordinate and stabilize multi-agent systems, because you're trying to bring in information and process it with different areas of the body and the brain. You have to bring it together and synthesize it. Homeostatic loop. Systems maintain stability via feedback, a continuous circular action where interdependent parts relentlessly affect one another. Digital hijacking, hacking. If you haven't seen the clip, or not clip, the series that I did, about 5 episodes, plus the live finale, where I read chapter 1, and just chapter 1 made a lot of great analogies between hacking computers and biohacking. Robert Duncan, Project Soulcatcher. I did a reading of chapter 1, and Dr. Robert Duncan's dead now. Unfortunately, he's passed away. Could be questionable circumstances, but it seems to be a lot of noise. I can't get a clear picture of what, I don't know, like I can't get good information on what happened to him. It's really little information here, little information there. But he wrote really, really, really detailed books about the psychotronic directed energy program. And he talks about how hacking in computers, like he uses the terms that a computer hacker would use. And he talks about how these are exactly what you're doing with biohacking. So I did a series reading that, and I encourage you to see that if you want to know more about this. But digital networks, and we talked about packet switching, hijack these loops, these ancient loops, regulating user states not for well-being, but to maximize attention. We saw the Moloch's bargain for AI paper. What happens when they maximize attention? It's not good. Not good when they do that. Neuropolitics and the snafu principle. Rule of symbols. Those who rule symbols rule us. Words carry emotional hooks, connotations, driving action independently of factual meaning. And there's no more proof of that than if you really just, turn on the TV, you go outside, you really are going to see that people view words in a completely different manner than you might. You might say something and you don't have any inclination that it would be something that would offend somebody, but it does, because they have a completely different view of that word. The reason that I think probably I speak for a good majority of people who just don't understand it, I think it has to do with the fact that it's just words. Like I see it as like, why would the word bother you and not the action? Why would it be the word and not the action? Because in my mind, how can you not do the action if you're not able to articulate and talk about it enough to learn not to do it? And so, yes, words do have power, and the best way, another analogy to the movement, is if you're going to communicate with another person, well, first you have to have an alphabet. So if you're, in America or one of the Romance languages, you would use the Latin alphabet. But if you were in Russia, you'd use the Cyrillic alphabet, the Chinese Mandarin alphabet in China. You're going to need an alphabet. Okay, then once you have an alphabet, you're going to have to put the letters together. You're going to put the letters together to form a word. But this can vary, because if you go into if you go into Mexico and you're speaking Spanish, you could spell, I'm trying to think of a word that comes to mind. Leche. Leche means milk in Spanish. But we spell, in America, we spell it M-I-L-K. So just because you're putting letters in different orders, it's dependent on context. So these really do play together. Celine's law, adequate communication flows freely, openly between equals. Hierarchical communication guarantees warp transmission. That's probably what Marshall McLuhan meant when he said the medium is the message. The jam. Domination / submission rituals inherently create perpetual communication jams and noise. Paradox of control. The part can never completely control the whole. The part can never completely control the whole. The controller remains caught in their own semantic network. So there's a paradox to it. The bicameral era here on the left. Early humans, I covered the bicameral mind theory a couple of days ago in the presentation. That was a pretty good one. I suggest checking that out. The idea was that, you know, in a past time, again, let's go and give you context and say this would have been a time where people didn't read and they didn't write. They may have had some basic spoken language skills, but in that time period, the hypothesis of the bicameral mind is that it was, you know, we kind of existed in a state where we hallucinated our thoughts as the voices of the gods, because we were almost like a really subtle veil between animals and humans. We weren't how we are now, but we weren't, like, we were in between animals and where we are now. So the bicameral mind theory makes the case that consciousness as we understand it now, and, you know, we have a better understanding of language, as we understand it now, may have arisen from the breakdown of the bicameral mind. So yes, the early humans operated via a bicameral mind. Behavioral control was directed by auditory hallucinations perceived as the voices of the gods. And this is the reason that when you go back and you read old, like the Odyssey or the Iliad or Dante's Inferno, or Dante's Divine Comedy, Dante's Inferno, when you read those, they use these as literary devices. You are supposed to, you have to have the subtext of the dynamic for what do these characters they're talking to, what do they mean, what is their backstory. They're trying to tell you a moral allegory, but it's not, you can't use words to get there. You have to do it this way, because that's how you get it to the deep structure. You get it to the deep structure by putting it into the format of a story. Language functioned purely as a survival tool to sustain focus on time-consuming tasks. Let me move myself over so you can see the other side. There we go. There we go. The fracture, 3000 BC, the transmutation of speech into writing, scene speech, called scene speech, shattered the bicameral architecture. Subjective consciousness emerged as a byproduct, according to this theory. But, I mean, theory in the context of, I've got Julian Jaynes, who wrote the book, The Origin of Consciousness, in the breakdown of the bicameral mind. I've got another text by Gary Lockman called A Secret History of Consciousness. And then we also have Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary. Those are three different books who are really making a very similar case, we also have the generative principle, which I showed you yesterday, that if you take a plus and a minus principle, or an active and a passive principle, or a man and a female, and you join them together, they generate something new. Or if I make a business proposal to you and you accept the proposal, we have ventured into a agreement, a contract, to bring something into being. And so I don't think it's really, I think it is a pretty solid case, according to my understanding, that there is this type of play between the brain hemispheres, yes. And I did show a clip of the split brain corpus callosum surgeries they do for like severe epilepsy. They will cut the connection between the two brain hemispheres. And this actually, people generally go on to have minimal side effects, and they're kind of funny. But the reason they do this is because if you have a severe seizure, grand mal seizure problem, and one half of your brain starts to have this seizure effect, by severing the connection, one half can have some time to react, or it can prevent it, at least for a period of time, from getting over to the other side. I don't know if they do it much anymore. This is an older clip, but it's fascinating nonetheless, because they do this little experiment where the guy sees a shape flash with, he would see it with the left eye. And because the left hemisphere controls the right side of your body, he would see it with the left eye. And the reason is because the left part of your left hemisphere of your brain has to do with speech. Sorry, I got that crisscrossed. I'll say it again. He saw it out of his left eye, a shape out of his left eye, like flash on a screen. Because it's crisscrossed like I was, the left side is operated by the other side, so in this case, the right hemisphere. Language is processed on the left hemisphere. So when you sever this connection, the corpus callosum, what happens is, like, he'll know what he wants to draw, but he won't be able to say it. He can draw it with his hand, but he can't say it until somebody else says it. It's fascinating. It is I remember it was the same video that I presented, the same one that I was shown in psychology. Fascinating. It's very fascinating. If you've ever heard of the gateway process, hemisphere synchronization, essentially by severing the corpus callosum, that wouldn't work anymore. If you would do that, there would be no way for you to filter out the difference of tone, because the way that you do that is through the corpus callosum. It connects those two hemispheres of your brain. And so I think there's a lot of evidence that this is a very real phenomena. Move myself back over. So the reducing valve of reality. Over here we have the mind at large, abstract symbols. Here in the middle is the devil is in the details, or sorry, the Maxwell's demon. The entropy and the channel noise. Because to communicate it, you have to color the fact. You have to modify. You have to have an opinion. Put it this way, let's see, I've got a pen here that I could use as an example. This pen here is, you could say black, but it's actually a very, 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 very light, or dark shade of blue. And there's navy blue, there's cobalt blue. Maybe you thought it was carbon black. there's tons of different ways to describe black or describe navy blue. You know, if you look into color codes, anybody who was on MySpace or something back in the day when you had to do color codes, you had to find the color you liked and it would give you a hex code, which is based off of a mathematical principle. And that's how you would get a specific color shade. And so to do that, you have to take what the raw truth in your mind is, silence, just pure silence. And you have to use words and do the best you can. That's like when you were watching, I was drawing sometimes I draw a blank on what word to use or how to phrase something. It's because, you know, I'm trying to convey the message and I'm like, what is a good word that encapsulates all of the detail here? That is the process that we're looking at here in the middle. Some detail is lost. And on the right side here, we have the biological survival fixed signal, because obviously your mind has to do certain tasks to keep itself safe for survival. That, you know, fight or flight, some of these tasks might happen automatically. Let me take a drink. Biological filter. Language acts as a reducing valve, funneling infinite reality into a trickle, strictly necessary for biological survival. As I said earlier, you have to, the master in this context has to only give a certain amount of information to the emissary. The emissary doesn't need to know everything, because if he does, bad things might happen. You know, he might just say something at the wrong time that he wasn't supposed to say. And it's the same idea. You know, if you think of a corporation, the CEO or the executive board of directors has a report of yearly performance that is designed and set up to give them enough information at that one period of time for a lot of different things. And so only so much will make it into that. Just because you know, how much do you want to read? And this is where the manipulation and fixity comes in. Words and pose, artificial precision and fixity, enabling memorialization and the manipulation of other humans at a distance. I would call this spell casting. Systemic integrity. Information theory dictates system survival relies on 3 levels. Level A, symbol accuracy. Level B, precision of meaning. And level C, the behavioral impact. Yeah, so here's where we get into quantum grammar. And it certifies and stabilizes a communication for the bridge. That's just one. If I just say for the cause or for the thing, that's stable, because it leaves you with an actual question. I have communicated to you that there is a thing, and I'm going to tell you or communicate more about that thing to you. Or you might have a question about that thing, but nonetheless, that thing now is a thing. And so, for the cause of the consequence, that's 2. For the cause is 1, 5, 6, 7. Of the consequence, it goes hand in hand. For and of, positive and negative, active and passive. But then when you have an active and a passive, then you have commerce, you have something bigger going on. You have that generative principle come into it. So where does the fiction and fraud come from? Standard language relies on probabilistic open-ended adverb-verb structures. Because in adverb-verb structure, adverbs modify verbs, and they do a little bit more than that. But for instance, he's running, she's running, you're doing, I'm doing, they're doing, we're doing, somebody is doing that. Those are all different people. Those are all different individuals. You have, in one case, I'm talking about an imaginary female, because I use this adverb verb of a modification. It's not just running. Now it's more specific. Now I've actually narrowed it down. I've made a something that's ambiguous, I've made it actually a little bit more coherent, because now, instead of just running, now you know that it's either multiple people running. Now you know maybe it's a guy running. Maybe you know it's not happened yet. So those are where does the fiction come from? That's where it comes from. Functions entirely in the realm of legal fiction or illusions. Also, this is where the doublespeak comes from. This is where all of this fraud comes from. It is fraud, because you can use it to trick people into signing contracts where they don't know what they're signing. How many times do you think that's happened before? So many times. That's why magic and language in my belief, I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, but it's like at least 70 to 80% of what real magic is in language. I 100% believe that. So yeah, it generates systemic ambiguity and lack of standing. Quantum facts. Language functions as a rigid, linear mathematical equation. Put it another way, it answers all of your questions. It gives you all of your context clues. Who, what, where, when, and why. And by whose authority. It's standing on its own. A fact stands on its own. Doesn't need anything else. Oh, yes, and this is what I did want to mention earlier, but I did forget. The reason these numbers are used, you can do some math with it, but the reason that he used numbers, in his own words, David Wynn Miller, if you were to take a sentence and you were to write preposition, noun, if you were to do this for every word, there would not be enough room. So he assigned them numbers. Now the issue was which number goes with which part. And this is where he figured out that it had to go forwards and backwards, because if you do it that way, you algebraically solve out based on the motion. Because so zero, there is only, a zero is basically a neutral connective with no movement. There's only two, or an and. And in programming, there's only I don't remember what it's called in electricity, but you have an and symbol and you have an or symbol. So I can say, if condition 1 is true and condition 2 is true, then do something. But I have another way of telling or setting it up in such a way that if 1 is true or 2 is true, then execute the code. So that's a zero value. He assigns 1 as an adverb, because an adverb is the most used part of language. It's the most commonly used part of language. And also because an adverb modifies a verb, which equals motion. And so in this sense, we're scaling up in terms of numbers. And from that, he was able to solve. He was able to say, basically, One is an adverb, two is a verb. An adverb plus a verb is an adjective. It's a fiction. When you change or modify a verb, you get an opinion, you get a descriptive adjective, you get a fiction. And so he literally figured this up by saying adverb plus what equals adjective. And he reverse solved it and he got verb. So he put adjective as one, verb as two, and the whole thing started to fall into place. And then he started grafting sentences out, and he discovered, based on putting, as I did in my simulation that I showed you, in the simulation that I did, there is a, I hate that I left that error in there. Talk about error correction, right? This, writing it on the top and going from left to right, and then on the bottom you go from right to left. And it's almost like a strand of DNA, because if you look at it in terms of like on two sides of a line, it goes backwards and forwards. And because it does that, it is a circuit. It's a stable circuit. And so it's just fascinating. It's genuinely fascinating. Yeah, the numerical values assigned to parts of speech mathematically balance meaning into facts that stand on their own. Operating systems of reality. Language strictly dictates whether an individual is subject of the system, or an operator of the system. Whether an individual is a subject of the system or an operator of the system. So the two different realms: surface structure, deep structure. Surface structure. In the modern English dialect, we use adverb and verb. That's the way that everybody is trained to use the English language. We use adverb, verb. Probabilistic and ambiguous. Its effect: it limits behavioral options, creates legal decoherence and noise, a confine to time, trapping to time, to and from, trapped in past and future illusions, because you've never been to the past or the future. You've only lived in right now. There's literally not a person who's ever lived that has ever lived outside of right now. And so for all intents and purposes, because that is a factual statement, because anybody who's ever lived has always basically lived in right now. That means that the past and the future are, in a sense, illusory. The deep structure. In the deep structure, if we're going to always be in the eternal now, the way to do it is this 5, 6, 7 error correction. Toroidal quantum error correction is how it compares. Because it maximizes choice, it establishes a mathematical certification of presence instead of to and from. In the quantum grammar syntax, you would use for and with. For and with. And so a for is kind of an act, it's like your positive lead, and then a with is your negative lead. Biological decoherence. And then here is the toroidal code. It's because a torus is used in quantum error correction. Has to do with qubit decoherence. Quantum computing uses closed loops to protect qubits. David Wynn Miller's syntax uses prepositional phrases to geometrically lock the noun's meaning. There's a feature of language called the dangling participle. I've got a definition for that. I'll read it in a minute. Removing a preposition creates a dangling participle, mathematically identical to a DNA frameshift mutation or a surface code logic error. Biological stop codons, punctuational marks, act as a strict biological stop codon. This is in your DNA, dictating the exact beginning and end of the contractual protein. So there's something in DNA that tells it, you know, when do you stop and when do you start? And maybe it has to do with the let's see if I got it right here. Maybe it has to do with this. Maybe because you can do a binary switch the same way you do as computing ones and zeros, binary. And the truth is if we assume that the reason that we can do all of the AI stuff we're doing now is because binary works, because we can have computers with ones and zeros, then it's logical to assume that the basis of the binary or the nuclear family, you know, the basis of the fact that we can reproduce or represent, the basis of that ensures that this whole fourfold generative principle works. It's not, you know, no matter what, even if there was black and white, this would unfold naturally. This would unfold naturally because if you believe in numbers, if you and I can agree that 1 is 1, 2 is 2, 3 is 3, and 4 is 4. If we can agree on that, then we agree on that's pretty much it. Because I could sit down with anybody and I could show them how you do this with actual numbers. You could just write, you know, all the numbers to infinity in a straight line. And I will show you how this pattern pops up in those numbers. This pops up in all numbers forever. Every third number will then reduce back down to 1 when you triangulate it into a tetractys or a Pythagorean tetractys. So maybe that's my hypothesis on how it knows how to, when is the beginning and the end? How does it know when to stop the old one and begin the new one? So this is a book, A Secret History of Consciousness by Gary Lockman. That's what this slide's based off of. So we have the mind and the observer here on the left, the prime mover in the term of the observer. The esoteric counter tradition asserts consciousness precedes matter. It is not a byproduct, but the evolving prime mover. The idea being that the observer principle is the evolving prime mover of matter. Assuming that God speaks the universe into existence. I mean, in which case, if God is using language, I would bet that he is the ultimate observer. You know, if you're using language, I think that implies observation. The schism of language. Language severed humanity from nature, creating the harsh polarities of mind versus world, forcing us to observe rather than participate. Here on the right, we have the nature, the world. Original participation. Early humanity existed in a state of cosmic unconscious intimacy and urobotic, I'm not read that word, U-R-O-B-O-R-I-C, uroboric connection with the world. Living potential. Consciousness is a living, evolving presence. You remember the presence? I am that I am. Is an evolving presence holding undiscovered expansive potentials for human evolution. Because, they talk about this Darwinian evolution, but imagine what evolution would look like if people learned to think. If common sense came back to the world, imagine what evolution would look like. You would see evolution like you've never seen it before. The magic of as if. Traversing the matrix. To navigate the modern system, one must utilize its linguistic structures, which are, its passports, its labels. You have to understand the symbols to successfully cross borders. You have to understand a topic. You have to stand under it. The disbelieving distance. This requires the magical stance of the as if. So you have to, if you live in the AI world that everybody is like suffering through right now, you have to have the as if. It's like it could just be a deep fake, as if. So you have to have a stance of like but you have to believe something with a detachment. You have to be able to almost simulate it to yourself. Keep an open mind of a certain. It's like you have to simulate it enough. Jesus says you had to plant each seed to see what grows, and then you can see what kind of fruit grows on the tree. And this idea of a seed is in the generative principle. And it also has to do with, planting a seed of thought or a command phrase, how language builds in words and syntax, and 5, 6, 7 can then lead to another closing phrase for the cause. That's for what cause? Close me out on that. You brought up this cause, tell me what it's about. Cause before the symptom. So each of them stands on their own. It's so hard to articulate this. That's why it's a real challenge to try and put these topics into precise words, because it's almost a dimension that most people have never really thought of before. And I admit a part of this is because this is a dimension that I'm trying to explore as well. Like I'm trying to figure out how to describe, or rather make comparisons between language with time and language without time. So it's an exercise, and that's what math is. Math isn't, don't get me wrong, you have a lot of applications for it, but it is, in pure math, it has to do with training your mind to do these exercises. Because in math you have a function. Well, you have to have a input to the function, and then you have an output to the function. So if we take in information through our 5 senses and we do something with it and we act back out, that's a function. So yeah, we have to have a disbelieving distance. Utilizing the rules of the system while maintaining absolute ontological distance. Never swear true allegiance to a label. Never swear true allegiance to a label. It's worth saying twice. Orthogonal realities. This is important. And actually, as a matter of fact, this is actually not even a figure of speech, because there is something called a imaginary number, or a complex number. And literally, fact and fiction can never meet, because if you look at a complex number, I won't get into it all now, but a complex number, one is on the x-axis and one is on the y-axis. One is going left to right and one is going up and down. So fact and fiction are orthogonal. That's what that means. X and Y axis are orthogonal. It's a mathematical word. I don't think you really hear that word unless you're looking at it in mathematical term, but it means basically like intersecting at a right angle. And so fact and fiction are in completely different dimensions. They can't meet. You exist outside of the label, the fiction, mirroring the absolute I knew I was going to butcher that. Orthogonality. of quantum states. Technic and Magic. That's a good book. These are a lot of these are really, really mind-blowing. I'm shocked at how old the books are. You know, these books are like some of these. I've got books on some of these topics branching into early. It's not called cybernetics yet, but they're really talking about the same thing. They just didn't have a word for it yet. Some of these things are from like before 1900, from like the late 1800s. So I'm just shocked at how old this technology concept is. It's much older than people know. And quantum states are orthogonal. Alchemy of the Mind, the trap, where a domesticated primate caught in a cybernetic loop of impoverished language. And language is the word. And to have language, you have to have breath. You have to have breath to have language. And guess what? Primates don't talk. So if anybody can find a primate that talks, then we can have an argument about that. But I think that the breath is the word. I think it's literally that simple. I think it's really kind of just been so simple it's hidden in plain sight the whole time. Usually things are so simple like that, and that's how you know you're right. So, but the idea is that this language, the devil is in the details. The devil is in the details. And that's where that comes from too. The noise, the static, you know, the old TVs that had, you know, you would play something and you'd get static. It's crazy how they just eliminated static for the most part. Now you just have Moloch's bargain manipulation. So yeah, usually this is done through emotional hooks and symbols, stories. Storylines are important. Mythology is important. The hack, by recovering deep structure, has to do with neuro-linguistic programming. Literally in a it doesn't have to be a malicious sense, but just in the sense of neuro, the mind, language, and programmatical structure. Now, it can be used for malicious purposes when you use this adverb, verb, modification, imagination, fictional, you know, coloring of opinion. No, it's not black, it's carbon. No, it's not navy, it's cobalt, you know, that type of thing. But if you use a stable form of communication where you don't have the past or the future, you don't have the noise. And again, you don't have to learn a new language. It's not what I'm presenting this for. It's for an exercise, but for people to understand that when computers and artificial intelligence works its way into everything, it will be doing so through a syntax that way, because it doesn't have a past and a future. It's just a machine. It just is experiencing things in the now time. So the evolution, returning to original participation, not with the universe, not through unconscious hallucination, but through conscious mastery of the geometric architecture behind reality. And those were but another book by Stan Tenen, I think it's called The Alphabet of Creation, or the Alphabet of Creation. We've got David Wynn Miller, we've got the Cybernetics, Norbert Wiener, we've got Bandler, we've got, who else did we have? Bring the Bird Back. Technic and Magic by Campagna. We have The Structure of Magic 1 and 2. A Secret History of Consciousness, The Master and His Emissary. Yeah, see, I've got the Substack post that has all kinds of extra notes and stuff on this. But just to, let's see if there's, to close it out with. I think, let me see if there's any more slides. That was it. That was it. Yeah, guys, that was the end of the slideshow. I thought that there's more than that. You know, Argurdison, it's getting that way. But if you go back to Orwell understood that it was going to be, the dictionary was getting smaller. You know, they were making words smaller. They were trying to communicate just as much as they did before, but they were trying to do it with less words. Oh yeah, I forgot. This is what I was going to show a few of these. Let me go ahead and show some of these examples real quick before I finish up. I'm just going to show a few of them because we don't have time for all of them. But I'm going to link. I'll link these the slideshow here in the description in the post so that people can see it afterwards, because it's definitely worth looking at. So move this over here. Then let's go for it. Yeah, so here are two examples just to break this down again. So in a traditional sense, somebody could say that he signs the contract. That's the traditional way. Now the quantum syntax for the signing of the contract is by this claimant. That'd be the way you would write it in this syntax. So when we break it down, what you'll find, he is a pronoun. That's for. Pro, when you take the prefix pro means no. Pro means no. Like when you put the prefix pro in front of something, I'm trying to draw a blank on a word. Maybe I'll think of it in a minute. No in the middle, pro, no, and then un at the end. To undo something means to not do, to do it in the reverse order, to undo it. So literally the word pronoun means no, no, and no when you break it down into its parts. It's called to syntact it, I think. Again, he signs. Signs is an action / verb without a spatial coordinate. You're stating that a phantom is performing an illusion. The quantum version eradicates the pronoun and transforms the action into a physical noun. Signing, anchoring the energy mathematically to the physical body, the claimant. Who is doing it? So when you break it down to its parts, you start with a preposition. That's 5. For. What for? What are you talking about? For what? Okay. Got a question? Answer it. For the. That's the ownership. The pen, my pen, your pen, his pen, her pen. That's what an article or an ownership. That's what a 6 is, the lodio, the article, the ownership. Who is doing this? What the possession, the I guess it narrows it down to a person. So for the what? For the signing. That's one block. And just to send everybody off with a visual of it. Let me put the visual side by side so that everybody can see. I'll do it one by one. Let me bring up the other screen. The visual helps a lot. Okay, so I write 4. So we're building a block, building a stable block for the signing. So that's one stable block. Okay, now we have our kind of, it's the active for the signing. Okay, what about it? So there's still kind of a more to this. It doesn't stand on its own all the way yet. But for the signing, I mean, we now have been communicated and informed that there is some issue, some signing that we are going to learn about. We're going to learn about what is going on with it next. And I'm articulating it this way to help you understand that there's a motion to it, so that there is a reason that I'm kind of being a bit goofy. It's a connection, or sorry, for the signing of preposition. We're doing this again, but in the passive. So for the signing, what about it? Or where did it come from? How did it get here? For the signing of what? Of the contract. For the signing of the contract. Okay, let's go back over to here. Let's type it in. Of the contract. But you have to understand that the for and the of are kind of like an on and an off. For this, or for the cause of the consequence. For the cause of the symptom. For the cause of the symptom. It's a active and a passive. It's the only way to articulate it. Okay, so again, we've got two stable bits of a sentence. There's probably a formal word, I just can't think of it now. Okay, so let's go back over here. For the signing of the contract. So now we're going to set it into motion, because now something is going, we have a signing of a contract, but because we began the phrase by for, we know that there's going to be motion. For the signing of the contract, well, what for? What about it? What for? So that's where the second half comes in. So the second half, we're going to begin with is. It's doing something. So if we go to the visual, you can see that is actually the connective tissue. It's actually the thinking verb. Again, you know, if you're going to drive somewhere, you can't do it before you think about it. So that's your linkage. Okay, let's bring ourselves back over here. Here we go. Okay, is. Next is by. So is by. By is our preposition. By this claimant. By this claimant. So for the signing of the contract is by this claimant. So let's go back to the simulation. By this claimant. So that is a stable chain, and that's because you can read it backwards. And here, when you read it backwards, what you would do is you would basically say, let me think about it. Let me get it right. By this claimant, for this claimant is by the signing of the contract. For this claimant is by the signing of the contract. So it reads backwards and forwards, and when you read the numbers by, you know, when you would flip it and turn it around, which is what I've got here, 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7. There's our 2 linkage, 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7. So then we would read it backwards. There's our 2 linkage. Then there's our 1 there. So for this claimant is by the signing of this contract. And then you would be able to reverse it as many times as you want. So here's the second example. We'll do one more before I get off here. She owns this house. Let me move myself over. There we go. She owns this house. That's the old way. The new way. For the ownership of this house is with the author. She is a void presumption. Owns forces the concept of possession into a fluid, unstable action, a verb. By using traditional grammar, the speaker surrenders actual possession. Quantum syntax mathematically locks the ownership as a static physical fact. Value 7, a ownership, a claim. It attaches it to the physical author of the claim using the possessive tether, with, that being with. So breaking it down by its parts. Let's go again. So we're going to start for the ownership. Okay, let's go over to here. For the ownership. That's one block. Go back. What about this ownership? For what ownership? Well, it's the ownership of this house. So that question kind of arises. You know, somebody says, for the ownership. Well, for what? For what ownership? Well, it's the ownership of this house. Okay, so let's add that. Of this house. So for and of, again, that's our active and passive. And so now we're going to set it into motion. What is this for? Literally, in the literal sense, what is this for? Well, it is with, let's go back to here. For the ownership of this house is sets it into motion. So we will set it into motion. For the ownership of this house is with the author. For the ownership of this house is with the author. In this sense, the author of the claim, the person who has the means to prove it as true. And again, it's like a very simple, short sentence, but you would probably chain more onto this. So, is with the author. So, when we go back over here to a simulation is with the author. So it's putting together these smaller little chunks in the very same way that I drew the analogy earlier of first you need an alphabet, then you need to take multiple letters and put them together, and then you then have words, and those words are able to be used to chain those together to form sentences, and you'll chain sentences to get, see, it's this infinite, it's same as DNA, and it's the same way that DNA is written. It just needs to know where to stop and end. So what we have is for the ownership of this house is with the author. But then you could reverse that and you could say, I don't know why I'm drawing such a blank. It's probably because I'm healing my toes right now. For the ownership of this house is with the author. That's actually, I'm probably overthinking it because I think that there's actually supposed to be a second part to that if it was longer. So for the ownership of this house is with the author. But when you read it backwards, you could say that the author of this house is with the ownership. For the ownership of this house is with the author. For the author of this, for the ownership of this house is with the author. For the, I don't know why I'm drawing such a blank. It's probably time for me to go to bed. I hope you guys learned something new, guys. I'm going to cut it here. I'm getting scatterbrained right now. I hope you guys learned something new. I hope you had a good bit of time with this system. I hope you understood what I was kind of comparing with language coming together in smaller chunks with really how that matches generative force on all different levels. The atomic structure, photosynthesis. We looked at Hegel's dialectic. We looked at all kinds of different things, but you know, child creation, how you create a new life, how all animals create new life. But I enjoyed presenting it to you guys. It was definitely a exercise to try and present such a advanced topic, especially when we're dealing with how language goes together, and part of communicating how language goes together is putting together language to describe how language goes together. So that's why I'm so, like, I don't know, I think I'm just scrambling myself up trying to go forwards and backwards and articulate it at the same time. But I'm probably going to put together some more little bits and pieces to explain this in smaller bite-sized chunks. And so I will hopefully have those completed very soon for anybody who's interested. So I will see you guys in the next one, guys. James should be back tomorrow, and I will be filling in whenever he asks me to come back. I appreciate to do it. I'm glad that people, you know, are here on James's channel. And it's always been the people that have been here since I started. It really feels like a community, and that's why I'm glad that I don't have to sacrifice the individual aspect of of it, because if you get too big and you have too many followers and you have too many, you know, people that you are at the you know, these are the people who make or break you. That is a punishment worse than hell, I think, is having to have millions of people saying stuff about you and creating fiction and illusions. But I appreciate each and every one of you. Have a good night, guys. Take care.